Officer Carter had earned a reputation in his small community, one that was both feared and respected. Some saw him as a protector, someone who ensured safety with a firm hand. Others, particularly those from marginalized groups, considered him a threat, a man who misused his authority and twisted the law to serve his personal biases. Carter had built his career on manipulation, fabricated accusations, and the unyielding support of a biased system that often turned a blind eye to his actions. He had mastered the art of targeting those he viewed as outsiders, and his behavior had remained unchecked for years. On a warm and quiet evening, a call came through. Suspicious activity reported at Willow Creek Park. The dispatcher mentioned two people potentially loitering, possibly involved in something illicit. To Carter, it was a perfect opportunity. The park was located in one of the town's more affluent neighborhoods, known for its exclusivity and well-maintained grounds. Carter had patrolled the area several times, and it was rare to see anyone from outside his usual circle. The mere sight of unfamiliar faces was enough to raise suspicion in his mind. As Carter pulled up to the park, he parked his patrol vehicle by the entrance and stepped out, flashlight in hand. His eyes quickly settled on two figures sitting on a bench under the soft light of a street lamp. Maya and Clara were both dressed in business casual attire, professional yet relaxed. Between them was a collection of files, a laptop, and a tablet. They were engaged in a serious discussion, occasionally gesturing toward the documents or typing on their devices. Carter's mind raced with assumptions. Two women, especially women of color, sitting in an upscale park at this hour? It couldn't be innocent. A smirk crept onto his face as he walked toward them. "Good evening, ladies," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Maya looked up first, her expression calm yet cautious. "Evening, officer," she replied politely. Clara glanced at Carter briefly, then returned her focus to the laptop without a hint of concern. "What are you doing here?" Carter asked abruptly, bypassing any form of courtesy. "This park closes after sunset." Maya pointed to a nearby sign, which clearly indicated the park's hours extended until 10 p.m. "We're within the allowed hours, officer. We're attorneys reviewing case files. This is a quiet space for work." Carter narrowed his gaze, scrutinizing them. Their explanation only fueled his suspicion. Why would two women of color be attorneys? And why would they choose this particular park to work at night? Ignoring the sign, he pushed on. "This park isn't a place for gathering or organizing things," he said, his tone sharp. "What exactly are you up to?" Clara finally looked up, her gaze steady but unyielding. "As Maya mentioned, we're preparing for a case. There's nothing unlawful happening here." Carter snorted. "Don't try to fool me. I know when something's off. Let me see those papers." Maya calmly placed her hands over the stack of files. "These are confidential legal documents, officer. You can't examine them without a warrant." That was all Carter needed to hear. Their refusal to comply was a challenge to his authority, and his frustration bubbled over. "So, you're refusing to cooperate? I've dealt with your kind before," he sneered. "Acting like you're above the law." Maya and Clara exchanged a look, a quiet, unspoken understanding passing between them. Clara gave a subtle nod, and Maya responded to Carter with unwavering composure. "Officer, we're not resisting. We're simply asserting our legal rights." Carter's face reddened. "Rights?" he muttered under his breath. He had no interest in hearing about their rights. To him, they were just troublemakers, no matter their profession. Without warning, he reached for his handcuffs. "Enough! You're both under arrest for trespassing and suspicious activity. Stand up." Maya's lips pressed together in a tight line, but she stood up without a word. Clara followed suit, carefully closing her laptop and setting it aside. As Officer Carter roughly secured the handcuffs on Maya's wrists, she glanced back at him and spoke softly. "You're making a mistake." Carter let out a hollow laugh. "Is that so? We'll see about that." He cuffed Clara next, his hold unnecessarily firm. Clara winced but didn't protest, her expression unreadable. Carter called for backup to transport the women to the station. As they waited, Maya and Clara stood quietly by the bench, remaining calm. Carter kept his eyes on them, his irritation growing as they showed no signs of distress. "You think you're smarter than me, don't you?" he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. Maya met his gaze with steady eyes. I think you're underestimating us. Carter scoffed. We'll see how smart you feel when you're in front of the judge. When the backup vehicle arrived, Carter loaded the women into the car, a sense of triumph swelling in him. To him, this was another victory, another time he proved his control over his town. But as he glanced at Maya in the rearview mirror, he saw a faint, knowing smile on her lips. It was subtle, but deliberate, and it sent a wave of unease through him. He quickly dismissed it. What could they possibly be planning? The ride to the station was filled with Carter's smug and condescending monologue about his so-called heroics in maintaining order in the town. I've dealt with plenty of troublemakers like you, he sneered, glancing back at the women in the rearview mirror. You think you can just come into places where you don't belong, stir things up, and get away with it? Not on my watch. Maya sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression calm and unreadable. Clara, beside her, stared out of the window, her face just as composed. Neither woman reacted to his taunts, and this silence bothered Carter more than he cared to admit. He thrived on seeing fear in the eyes of those he arrested, but these two women gave him nothing. You know, he continued, trying to provoke a reaction, it's people like you who think the rules don't apply to them. Always playing the victim, always trying to create chaos. But I've got news for you, this is my town. I don't let chaos take root. Still, Maya and Clara remained silent. Maya's steady gaze in the rearview mirror made Carter squirm in his seat. He barked, what? Got nothing to say now? I figured you'd be all worked up about how unfair life is. Maya finally spoke, her voice even and calm. There's nothing to say. Actions speak louder than words. Her response made Carter clench his jaw. There was something about her confidence that unnerved him, something that didn't sit right. But he shoved the feeling aside, chalking it up to arrogance. He was determined to show these women who was really in charge. When they arrived at the station, Carter dragged Maya and Clara out of the vehicle and led them inside, drawing the attention of a few officers on duty. His colleagues exchanged glances, but remained silent. They had seen this routine before. Blake's reputation was well known, and most of the department had learned to avoid crossing him. As Carter began processing the women, he fabricated a string of charges, each one more outlandish than the last. Conspiracy to incite a disturbance. Trespassing. Resisting arrest, he muttered to himself, typing quickly, inventing details to build his case. Maya and Clara remained composed, their expressions unreadable. Maya's sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the positioning of the surveillance cameras. Meanwhile, Clara watched Carter intently, particularly when he slipped a folder into Maya's bag, a folder neither of them had brought. Carter turned to them with a smug grin. Well, look at that. Seems you two weren't just having a quiet chat in the park. I found proof of your little plans to stir up some trouble. He waved a piece of paper from the folder triumphantly. Clara raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Maya tilted her head slightly, observing him closely. Interesting. I wonder where that came from. Carter ignored her remark, too busy congratulating himself on the supposedly foolproof case he was building. As the hours passed in the cold, sterile environment of the station, the tension only grew. Carter, still convinced he was in control, continued to embellish his fabricated story, ignoring the calmness in Maya and Clara's demeanor. He thought he had them cornered, but a creeping doubt began to take root in his mind. The women's unshakable composure, their refusal to react to his taunts, unnerved him. They weren't just silently enduring. They were waiting for him to make a mistake. Maya and Clara's quiet resolve wasn't an act of submission. It was their quiet strength, their belief in the law and in the power of truth. They knew their rights, and they understood that their fight was just beginning. Their calmness wasn't fear. It was a statement of defiance. They were playing a long game, one that would turn the tables on Carter and his misuse of authority. By the time the paperwork was done, it was clear that Carter had overplayed his hand. Maya's sharp instincts had already flagged the inconsistencies in his actions, and Clara's careful observations had captured details he hadn't even considered. What Carter didn't realize was that he was being watched, not just by the cameras in the room, but by the very system he had manipulated for so long. He had underestimated his prisoners, mistaking their silence for weakness. As they were escorted to their holding cells, Maya and Clara exchanged a knowing glance. They weren't going to let this stand. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready for the battle. In the end, Carter's arrogance would be his undoing, and the truth would shine through, no matter how hard he tried to hide it. They weren't just victims of the system. They were its reckoning.